This is big news. We need to talk about this because nothing like this has ever happened. The San Francisco Board of Supervisors voted 8-3 in favor of authorizing the use of these lethal robots to kill suspects in dangerous situations.
San Francisco police asking for approval by the Board of Supervisors to use robots like this one as a potential deadly force option.
And that controversial plan just passed about an hour ago. Police robots will be allowed to use potentially deadly force.
How Black Mirror is this really? Does this mean that we're gonna see autonomous robots armed with machine guns? Here's the good, the bad, and the ugly of lethal police killing machines. Every day I feel like the world is taking a step closer to being a literal Black Mirror episode. This is about to seem like a low-budget sci-fi dystopian horror film that Netflix puts out. I regret to inform you that this is actually all completely real. This is a reality. Welcome. So, with policing systems in this country already being extremely controversial, and growing concerns about police militarization and over-aggression, definitely, in my opinion, not the best time to be trying to implement brand new lethal robots. More than likely, they're not helping that. So, that said, I'm Abigail. I'm glad you're here. Let's get into it. So like I said, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors voted 8-3 last Tuesday to permit the use of robots armed with explosives in extreme situations where there are people's lives at stake and the risk is so immense and there's no alternatives available. And then right before that second confirmation vote, in response, I guess, to all of the public outrage against this idea, people are really, not super excited. You're probably more terrified of it than anything. They backtracked. They said, we're actually going to take some time to think about this.
Supervisors appeared to change course. For now, it sent the issue of robots and lethal force to be considered by committee again.
Even though they backtracked this time, just the fact that this was on the table and approved at all is a massive deal, and I definitely don't think this will be the last we'll hear of it in the next 12 months. So how would this work? How would these killer robots actually work? What are all the possible uses? And what are the real dangers? How scared should you be? How scared should I be, And then I'm also going to talk about the story of Micah Johnson, who was the first and only man to be killed by police using a robot. Pretty insane story. Definitely stay tuned for that. When they amended the proposal, they basically specified that officers could use these bots only after all alternatives were exhausted. So after they've tried to de-escalate, subdue, they've tried to intervene, and nothing else works, that's when this would be allowed. And also you would have to have a very limited number of high-ranking officers, and they were the only ones that could authorize of the robots as a deadly force option. So they did not approve arming these robots with guns, only with explosives. The opponents of this news basically said that this authority would lead to more militarization of police forces, which are already a bit too aggressive. The police in Oakland actually abandoned the idea of arming robots with shotguns after there was public backlash, but they have outfitted robots before with pepper spray. Now, this recent authorization and then backtracking has brought up a lot of questions about, one, the ethics of using a robot as a means of deadly force. What kind of precedent does this set? You know what I mean? And then additionally, the specifics of how it would actually be implemented. What would it be able to do? What would it be capable of? Who's going to regulate? Who's going to oversee this? All of those kinds of questions are brought up as well, because like I said, with San Francisco authorizing this in the first place, more than likely this isn't the only place that's going to try this. There are also companies that right now have made different robotic systems that are equipped with body-worn cameras and facial recognition software, but departments didn't want them or weren't allowed to have them. I don't know, but they have been built and offered before and were declined. So as far as robots in policing, is this brand new? No. There have been different kinds of robotic entities used in policing before, including the robot dog. So NYPD, New York, had this robotic dog, like a robot canine, that was essentially gonna, behave and act as a normal police dog would, but was obviously not a real dog. It was a robot dog. That was not something that people were happy with. They were very, very mad about it and scared of it, understandably.
That thing is creepy.
They returned this. They got pretty quick after they got it because turns out people don't really like the idea of machines the size of dogs chasing them down in the street. It's kind of unsettling. People they don't really like that. Now, there are lots of times that robots have been used in policing for good reasons and successfully doing multiple things that would have put a lot of people at risk otherwise. For instance, they've been used to carry phones, notepads, pizza even, to suspects. They've been used to help search in mass shootings like at the Orlando nightclub shooting. One was used in the manhunt for the Boston Marathon bombing suspect, Barry Wally. Another example of a good bot was the AI-enhanced autonomous drone that was able to find people after natural disaster by locating them after hearing screaming. And I mean, that's awesome. That's amazing. That's a great use of this technology. The actual deadly force robot is not at all difficult to make. I mean, it is, but not it would be hard for me to make, but it's not hard to make. We have the technological capabilities, so that's why these policies, regulations, and authorizations are such a big deal. These machines, so far, just with what we know we have access to and what we've seen work in the past, they can be AI enhanced and autonomous and recognize human screams and locate them. That's insane. That's pretty wild. And so let's talk a little bit about Micah Johnson. This happened in Dallas in 2016, and he was 25 years old, and he was the first person to be ever killed using a robot by police. Here's Micah's story and how all of this went down. So Micah Johnson was born in Mississippi, and he was raised in Texas. He described his childhood as stressful. At 17, he joined his high school's ROTC program, and then after he graduated, he enlisted in the U.S. Army Reserve, and he entered the Army Reserves as a carpentry and masonry specialist. But during basic training, he was taught how to use an M16 rifle. While he was in the Army, other people said that he was very openly religious. He would socialize a bit, but he kind of kept to himself for the most part. They also said he was a klutz, he was goofy, he was kind of clumsy, but overall he was pretty nice. He was just quiet, a bit of a loner, not very motivated either, a little bit lazy. He actually ended up getting deployed to Afghanistan in November of 2013. So while he was in Afghanistan, a female soldier who was there with him accused him of sexual harassment. She took this to the officers of the Army and she basically said, this man is in serious need of mental health counseling. They investigated the accusations and they found proof of pretty much everything that she had accused him of, including finding her underwear that she had said he stole in his pocket. Okay, he stole it from her laundry. He was disarmed under the recommendation of his platoon sergeant, and then he was placed under 24-hour surveillance for the remainder of his tour. He returned to the U.S. 2 months later in July of 2014. He was then discharged from the Army, and he was honorably discharged, but they said that they think this was an administrative error, that he should have not been honorably discharged. He should have been regular discharged, but then he remained in the Individuals Ready Reserve, the IRR, meaning that he could be called back into the Army if they needed him. People who knew Micah during his military service believed that he had been really, really stressed with serving in a combat zone. It had really deeply affected him. This probably played a pretty big role in his declining mental state. Parents said that he was once extroverted and patriotic, and at one point he even wanted to be a police officer, but after his discharge from the Army, all of that changed. He became disillusioned, he became reclusive and resentful, and he was very anti-government. And then he sought treatment a little bit later, he sought treatment with the VA for anxiety, depression, hallucinations. He was saying that he had nightmares after seeing his fellow soldiers die in explosions, as you would. He started hearing voices, he would hear mortar exploding, and that after returning to the US, he got increasingly paranoid, he was experiencing full-blown panic attacks. VA doctors that saw Micah said, he has symptoms of PTSD, but they didn't formally diagnose him with PTSD for some reason. I don't know why. They deemed that he was not a threat to himself or others. So basically said, you have symptoms of PTSD, but it's fine. Go home. Okay. This turned out to be a really, really fatal mistake. So then in Dallas, Texas, in July of 2016, a protest was organized in response to the 2 men that were shot and killed by police in the couple days prior. At this time, that was Alton Sterling, and Philandro Castile. The protest in Dallas was one of many that were going on around the country. People were protesting in a lot of major cities. It was not just Dallas. But at this one protest, there were 800 people that had showed up to protest and 100 police officers that showed up to monitor the protest. So in total, there were about 900 people involved, including 100 law enforcement officers. Around 9 p.m., Micah parked his SUV in front of the entrance to El Centro College. He flipped on his hazard lights, and the street that he parked on was empty. It wasn't one of the streets the protest was occurring on, but they had cleared the street that he parked on in order to enable the protest to proceed along Main Street. He then opened fire into a group of protesters and officers that he saw on Main Street.
All SWAT elements to 801 Main Street. All SWAT elements 801.
So he started shooting from where he was parked. 3 police officers were shot and killed on the spot by Micah. 3 more were injured, and that's in addition to a civilian who also was shot and injured. 11 officers attempted to fire back at him, but they weren't able to tell where he was shooting from. They couldn't get a visual of where he was located, so they were kind of shooting into the dark. It didn't work. They didn't get him. So they scrambled to block the intersection, make sure that no protesters stepped into the line of fire, and he continued to shoot just a hail of bullets at groups of people. Someone staying at a hotel nearby actually started filming Micah from their balcony. He had walked over, he loaded his rifle, and he began firing shots kind of indiscriminately, randomly, wherever he could to kind of draw police over to him. One officer, Brent Thompson, he turned the corner around where Micah was, and he became face to face with Micah. Micah obviously started shooting. Officer Thompson shot back, but unfortunately, he was shot multiple times and was killed there. Now, Micah was injured, though. He did get wounded. He was shot. So he went to go try to get inside of the college. So Micah, now injured, bleeding, attempted to run into the college. He tried shooting out a glass door. That didn't work. But there were 2 campus police officers that were standing right inside the building on the other side of the door. They obviously saw him and were going to try to stop him, as they should, but one of them was shot in the stomach and the other one was hit by a bunch of broken glass. So they were injured as well. But they did survive, thankfully. After this, he heads around the building to a different door, shoots out the glass in that door, and is able to get inside. He gets inside the college and he heads through, and I need to say this now. This college was not empty. It wasn't closed. There were students in here, there were teachers in there, there were people in there. It was not empty or closed down or anything. This was a building having classes, okay? So he gets inside, and he heads on through the building, trying to get to the other side where he'd be far away and harder to find. The campus police officers followed him. One of them did. His name was Corporal Shaw. He was the one that was shot in the stomach, and he made his way following the trail of blood that Micah was leaving. And he followed this trail of blood up into the stairwell, saw the letters RB that Micah had painted in his own blood in the stairwell. Once inside, Corporal Shaw was actually unknowingly right below where Micah was. So Corporal Shaw was underneath, at the bottom level of the stairwell where you enter, and then Micah was up top on another level. You can kind of see how that's gonna go, right? So from above, Micah begins shooting down at Corporal Shaw, who is unable to see where Micah is from where he's standing. He ended up having to retreat, go back into the hallway. There was nothing he could really do. Because if he tried to proceed any further up the stairs, Micah would just shoot him. Micah's on the 2nd floor of the building. He runs through, past a mezzanine, through the library, but ends up right there at a dead end, right in front of a wall of windows. At this point, he's kind of backed into a corner. He's ran himself to a dead end. What's he gonna do? He decides to shoot out the window, and he fires multiple shots down at the street below, because he was on the 2nd floor of the college and the wall was all window. So he once that glass was shot out, he just had a clear view of the street from above. Perfect for a sniper, right? Awful. It's awful. But he begins just shooting down into the street below at any police officers that he could see. He ends up shooting and killing Officer Michael Smith, who was standing outside of a 7-Eleven, and this brings his total to 5 police officers that he had killed. And this now, at that moment, had just become officially the deadliest event for law enforcement officers since the terrorist attacks on 9/11. Pretty big deal. So police started rushing now to safely evacuate, all of the students and teachers that were inside of the college. And at this point, they were also trying to block any possible escape routes that Micah had to kind of make sure that he was stuck where he was and couldn't flee. They found him, and he was behind a corner near the library, and he was still firing off shots when they managed to find where he was. In between Micah and the SWAT team was a 30-foot-long hallway. He entered into a standoff with the SWAT team, so he's shooting at them, they're shooting at him. In total, it was more than 200 gunshots were fired between Micah and the police during this standoff. And all of the walls in this college were drywall. So, as you can imagine, bullets and drywall, bullets beat drywall every time. If you're playing rock, paper, scissors, and you're drywall and I'm bullets, I got you, like, I win. And the thing is, since this was a crowded building with students and teachers still inside, they can't have bullets flying through the drywall into random places where somebody might be. There was nowhere safe for the officers to really take cover. The officers decided to try to negotiate with Micah. This had become like a full-blown standoff at this point. They attempted to bring in a negotiator who was going to try to talk him down. So the officers began asking him questions. And Micah basically said that he would only speak to black police officers. He would not speak to anyone who was white. He called himself X, so he was referring to himself as X. And the negotiator was Sergeant Gordon. He actually did tell Micah that he was black, and this allowed them to continue talking.
Because he says he's doing this for his people. And that's what I was saying. And I think the hook that I had with him was that I was an African-American male. Because he told me, he asked me.
They negotiated for like 2 hours, and Micah just lies repeatedly over and over. He's playing games, he's laughing, he's singing, he is basically saying, how many did I kill, how many did I get, saying he wants to kill more.
If you not see the proof, you fighting. That's what I'm doing. If I was a soldier and I was killing Iraqis, that would be praised me as a hero. And now that I killed y'all as a real terrorist, now what? I'm mentioning the same.
No more. He's like kind of taunting the police, luring to lure them down the hallway so he could shoot them. After several hours of trying to negotiate with Micah, they were still nowhere near having him surrender.
Did you think he was going to give up?
Initially, at first, once he wasn't shooting anymore, I'm like, well, maybe he'll give up. But after talking to him, I asked him just to put the rifle down. I told him, hey, CNN is outside. I'll let you talk to him. I said, you have valid points? And he said, I've said enough with this rifle. So I'm like, okay. So he's not going to give up.
They were in pretty much the same place that they started in.
You can, X. Nah, this needs to be done. The talking is over. It's time for a revolution, brother.
You know, he could charge back down the hallway at any second and shoot them, because they would essentially be running from him at that point if he did charge back into the hallway. If they attempted to go down the hallway, he would shoot them. They tried to use explosives, or they tried to just shoot from other areas. They would put people at risk. So they couldn't do that. They were kind of backed into a corner. They had no options at that point. So they weren't sure what to do. What do you do in that situation? You can't let him flee. You can't really turn and run. I mean, what can you do, you know? Not without risking another life. So they decided they were gonna try something completely new, something that's never been done before, and they were gonna use a robot. Pretty smart idea. I mean, they pulled this off. In my opinion, I think it was pretty smart. They would use this remote-controlled robot. It was called the Remote Andros Mark VA1. And it was essentially a bomb disposal robot. So they rigged this bomb disposal robot up, right? They used duct tape and they taped onto it about a pound of C4 explosive.
It was not, weaponized. This was a jerry-rigged decision made when they essentially ran out of options.
Taped it in a part where it was kind of hidden, so you didn't obviously see it on the robot. And then they sent the robot down the hallway. I read somewhere that they told Micah that it was a phone that they were sending so he could communicate easier, which is why he didn't just shoot the robot. But I also haven't seen that on other sites, so I don't know if that's true. But it's possible they told him it was a phone, which is why he didn't react to the robot coming down the hallway. The robot goes down the hallway and detonates. The explosion kills Micah and does not injure anybody else, so it was completely successful in that regard. That worked out for them pretty well. And this made Dallas police the first to ever kill a suspect using a robot.
It's essentially uncharted territory. It's raising a lot of questions about what this means for the future of robots in policing and the use of force, especially deadly force. This was kind of the worst case scenario where they didn't feel they had any other way to get at this suspect that wouldn't put officers' lives at risk. And keep in mind, his whole mission was to shoot police.
I think this is an example where they really didn't have any other options. They had no other choice that didn't put either their or civilian lives at risk. You know, I can see how this would be a good option, which is why it would be approved in San Francisco, right? I mean, obviously in situations like this, and also, you know, mass shooters, active shooters, which is on the rise, all of these other things, those are definitely situations where I could see robots being helpful. However, the fact is that these situations are rare. The likelihood of lethal robots being used only in these very rare extreme situations is super unlikely. I mean, if you think about it, you should really only use deadly force at all in absolutely life or death, no other option scenarios. But we know that's not the case. So to assume that it would be different with robots would be kind of stupid, in my opinion, okay? But I think it sets a really dangerous precedent, and it puts us on a really dangerous path. And I think that it puts a lot of people at very serious risk, and I'll tell you why. So let's get into the risks, the problems, the concerns, the things that are in the event that this is authorized elsewhere or is authorized in San Francisco. Let's talk about biases. If you don't know much about machine learning or artificial intelligence, those systems can develop biases. It is just part of their programming. It's gonna happen. And there are entire people with entire jobs that are paid a lot of money to go through and make sure that these biases are identified and corrected in all kinds of systems. Sometimes the biases are problematic, and other times it just leads to like results that aren't great. So from facial recognition services to online advertisements, AIs have been known to show and demonstrate evidence of racial and gender biases. It happens. There's people that go through and make sure they try to correct these things. When it comes to biases in AI, though, there's 3 different categories of biases that AI can have. So there's algorithmic prejudice, which occurs when the system relies on a certain element in order to make a decision, and when that element involves anything that could be related to protected classes, right? So race, gender, age. There's also negative legacy, and this refers to biases that are already present when the model is trained. So for instance, if it was you were training a model online and you used like resources that had biases in them to train the model, that's going to be a negative legacy. It's a bias that is inherent to the building and training of the machine, not one that develops over time. And there's underestimation. That's the third one, which occurs when there's not enough information for the model to make confident conclusions for some certain part of the population. So if there's like a minority community, for instance, that there's not a lot of information about, the machine may not be able to be very accurate in its decision making when it comes to those groups because it doesn't have enough information. Basically, with early predictive policing algorithms, there was no access to racial data. The algorithm had any access to when it's making its predictions and gathering its predictions. It doesn't have any access to racial data. However, it relied heavily on location. And you need to add location in for a predictive policing algorithm. You would have to have location. It's kind of essential. Location is highly correlated with race. So even though they didn't put racial information into the model or train it with racial information, by training it with location information, inherently trained it with racial information. So even models that are blind to demographical data can still encode this information through other features that happen to be correlated statistically. And considering the amount of biases that exist in policing, algorithms and machine learning systems will learn this behavior. It's inevitable. Do we trust the same systems that are acting with these biases in the first place to, for some reason, decide to actually act on it when it comes to robots? They don't even act on it for their own officers. They're not going to act on it for their own robots. So the robots were approved by San Francisco, at least for a short time, and then later unapproved again. Those, however, are remote controlled. They're not autonomous, meaning they don't have the ability to think for themselves or act for themselves. You know, technology evolves so fast that it's likely that even these remote controlled robots would probably be slowly updated and upgraded over time in little ways. They'd add different features and different capabilities, things on their own that are not all that concerning at face value. And honestly, it makes sense, right? Let's go through a couple of them that we could see. For instance, first, let's say they add facial recognition abilities, and this, they say, is just to improve accuracy of the machine. Okay, sure. Get on board with this because nobody wants the wrong person getting killed by a police robot. And then they add like firearm detection capabilities. So it can tell, if somebody is carrying a firearm. It can identify that. And people get on board with this. Nobody's really upset, nobody's really even paying attention because what they say is, this will help us protect the public from shooters and identify possible shooters. People, we need that, right? We don't need gun control, we need this. It just happens quietly. And then they add the ability for the robot to, say, navigate and memorize spaces. Like your adorable little Roomba that walks around your living room, that rolls around your living room and knows exactly where your couch is, exactly where your coffee table is, somehow still manages to get tangled in your phone charger. And, are people suspicious about this? Well, no. Like, why would they be? It's just like an adorable little vacuum, but instead it's a lethal killing machine. And so on, until basically you have a fully autonomous killing machine without all the hassle. Just bypass all that red tape, don't let anybody get in your way, especially not the American public, and just, slowly but surely upgrade after upgrade until you have what is essentially a fully autonomous killing machine. Easy enough. And totally terrifying. Totally terrifying. I know this all sounds crazy, like I've got my tinfoil hat on, I've got like my bunker in my yard that I am prepared to hide in when the killer robots come to take us all out, but it really isn't like that because this did get approved, and the only reason it's not still approved is because there was so much public backlash. So as far as biases, right, police administrative records, they are notorious for not wanting to report genuine or real statistics. They will report hand-picked instances, and that is about it. Total number of individuals that officers encounter, for instance, is not reported. So it's really hard for researchers to get accurate information because so much goes unreported. There's no federal standardized reporting requirements, so the data is really inconsistent between departments. You might have one police department that reports nearly everything, you might have another that reports nearly nothing, and there's no federal standardization for what needs to be reported and what doesn't. The FBI data on fatal police shootings was undercounted by more than half. So 2021, only a third of police departments' fatal shootings appeared at all in the FBI database. Only a third. There's a huge lack of federal regulation in general that allows for these practices that very much reduce transparency and hide a lot of things and definitely skew estimates of subsequent events. So in the event that you would have a predictive AI involved in one of these bots, the likelihood that it would be trained with or learn from accurate information is very unlikely. And right now, the studies that are relying on this biased data can very much underestimate the role that race plays in police-civilian encounters. If researchers and people conducting these studies are drawing incorrect conclusions and getting a misrepresentation of the actual situation, what's to think that a machine is going to be different? It's more than likely going to be exactly the same and come to incorrect conclusions as well. The number of fatal police shootings has risen in recent years, with 2021 being the highest on record. More than half of people who were shot by police are between 20 and 40 years old. An overwhelming majority of the victims, 95%, are male. And Black people are more than twice as likely to be shot by police than white Americans. Hispanics are also more likely to be shot by police, but not by such a wide margin. When it comes to the use of lethal force, having robots that reduce risk for police officers, increase visibility, increase just abilities in general, there's just going to be more situations where lethal force might be used when it otherwise hadn't, or more situations because of the fact that this robot doesn't pose really any risk to law enforcement, whereas going up and shooting somebody does pose a risk. Now let's look at San Francisco specifically, because San Francisco is the place that this was authorized. So the San Francisco Police Department arrested Black people with the widest racial disparities of any jurisdiction in the state. Also arrest Black people at the highest rate of any major California city, 9.8 times higher than its arrest for non-Black people, and 3.6 times the average arrest rate for Black people statewide. Additionally, they have a uniquely deficient data reporting system. They have the worst statistical reporting of any California law enforcement agency. So if there's anybody that we're gonna authorize lethal force robots, Black Mirror style, chasing people down in the street, facial recognition, all that kind of, armed with explosives to target suspects or the public in general. Is this the police department that should be given that ability? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Who's to say that all of these instances where the San Francisco Police Department has proven that they refuse to be clear about their practices, they don't report the data, the last thing I think we need to do is arm them with killer robots. Personally, there's the risk that they will turn into yet another just avenue of abusive tactics. And the only way I think that we could prevent it from being used on the wrong people completely would be allowing these bots to use facial recognition, in which case there's a lot of other terrifying things that could come from equipping police robots with facial recognition, including tracking people in public, following people, finding people, identifying you, knowing your location. I mean, think about protests, right? Think about, there's just so many different things that I can think of that would be awful and would come from equipping police with robots that have facial recognition and the capability to kill. Another concern, and this is a big one, is security and hacking. Policymakers needs to be completely aware of the risk that hackers could pose. There are tons of instances where drones, cars, medical devices, all kinds of things have been hacked or intercepted or affected by somebody with bad intentions. I don't think that police robots would be immune to this, especially if they're not as advanced, because we want to keep them less advanced to keep them further away from being a dystopian nightmare, but we also need to keep them advanced enough that they're securely protected. That's a very thin line. And all of those concerns are concerns for even when the robot is not autonomous and is controlled by a live, living, breathing human being in real time, which is only the beginning. It never stays that way. Even if it never becomes fully autonomous, quote, more than likely it will be damn near close to it. There's so many things that can go so wrong. We've seen movies. Definitely kind of concerning, but this is a reality as we head into the new year. This is it's a revelation. I think until we can trust that the policing system is reformed and has been majorly improved as far as biases and as far as the use of lethal force in general right now as it is, and the amount of mistakes that have been made, the amount of things that are problematic, I think we need to fix those things, focus on those things, come back to killer robots when that has been done. So, with that being said, man, what world is this? Where am I? But what's going on? Thank you for watching. I hope that you enjoyed. Subscribe, and I will see you later. Be safe out there. Bye.